This episode of our show has been sponsored by Eldermancy, who are about to put out their new Sunken Isles on Kickstarter, coming in February 2022.
Sunken Isles is a seafaring adventure for 5th edition that takes your adventure through a magical island chain with a mysterious deity. This book is also going to include lots of new rules for ships and naval combat.
This adventure has been headed up by Logan, one of our fellow YouTubers. His channel, Runesmith. You should definitely check it out as well. And the Sunken Isles adventure really draws on some different and unique inspiration from what we typically see in your average seafaring adventure. So this is definitely one to keep an eye on. You can follow the links in the description below to be notified when the Kickstarter goes live.
And now, on to this week's episode.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything D&D, including advice for players and guides for DMs.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Today, we are talking about how to run a Lich in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Perhaps one of the most quintessential villains in Dungeons & Dragons, the Lich is a undead mastermind, a powerful arcane spellcaster, and a soul-devouring monster.
Besides being iconic in Dungeons & Dragons, Liches have a lot of literary roots in fantasy and folklore. A wizard who has been driven mad by the pursuit of eternal life is a great story in itself. So today, we're jumping into our monster series on how to run Liches. In this series, we are going to take some of our favorite and most iconic Dungeons & Dragons monsters. We are going to talk about what they are, role-playing one, combat tactics, and building an adventure around one, as well as possibly some variations and options to bring these creatures, in this case the Lich, into the forefront as becoming the BBEG or a major villain for your party. There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling. So first of all, what is a Lich? We kind of already talked about how they are the master of undead, but let's dig into this a little bit more.
In Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, a Lich is a challenge rating 21 legendary undead monster. These creatures are former living human wizards who, through a dark ritual, sometimes involving a pact with the demon lord Orcus, have learned how to artificially extend their lives through undeath. Their flesh rots away, and all that is left behind is their skeletal figure.
Beyond just being a powerful undead spellcaster, they have many other interesting components to them, one of which is the Lich's phylactery. This is an item that anchors the Lich's soul, allowing them to live eternally. As long as their phylactery persists, they get to live forever. So you have a really interesting dynamic with this creature where they can't actually be fully destroyed unless their phylactery is also destroyed.
If a Lich's physical body is annihilated, the Lich simply reforms several days later in close proximity to their phylactery. This is why we often see Liches hide their phylacteries in cunning ways behind deep death trap dungeons where few can learn to access them. However, there is a key component about a Lich which must not be forgotten. For fundamentally, no matter the source, undeath is always a curse. A zombie feeds on the flesh, a ghoul might gnaw the bones, and a vampire drinks blood. But for a Lich to sustain their undead nature, they must consume the souls of mortals, which they must channel into their phylacteries in order to sustain their undead existence. If they do not, the Lich will quickly degrade in both body and mind, becoming a demi-Lich, a cursed existence of madness that they must endure for centuries thereafter. Thus, the Lich is truly a tragic figure. An ambitious and powerful wizard, through their own doings, has brought a horrific curse upon themselves. And make no mistake, for despite the vast power of a Lich, like all undead creatures, they are fundamentally cursed, and whatever remains of their brilliant minds is tainted by the madness of their undead nature.
In D&D lore itself, we have seen some very prominent Liches Acererak and Vecna being two of the most famous characters in all of D&D history, and even Acererak has stood out as a villain in D&D 5e in the Tomb of Annihilation. But let's jump into some of the role-playing traits that you might use to bring your Lich to life. One of the first things, just to jump off of what Monty said, is the madness of a Lich. The knowledge of how to become a Lich is said to only be possessed by the demon lord Orcus. Orcus is the lord of the undead, and the process of becoming a Lich drives them mad. When you are role-playing your Lich, you have to keep in mind that they are great spellcasters, which means that there is a brilliance about them. So you really get to hone in on that concept of the brilliant mind who has stepped over the line into the realm of madness.
Oftentimes, one of the most common role-playing traits that we see deployed in Liches is that they are undead masterminds who plan long-term schemes to ascend to even greater levels of power. And oftentimes the Lich's quest for power and their intelligence tends to overshadow the underlying madness and unhingedness that they have as an undead creature. And I think that for many intelligent undead, this is also very common with vampires too, is that we allow the power of these creatures and the intelligence of these creatures to just kind of take center stage and forget about the price that they had to pay to gain that immortality. And that is where the flaws come into play when we are creating a Lich. One of my favorite perspectives to take with a Lich in particular is that a Lich may have had noble intentions in taking up the mantle of immortality. Perhaps they wanted to make sure that they would still be in existence, to guide the world forward into a bright future, or meet a horrific threat still yet to come. Yet in the process of doing that, the Lich has consigned themselves to a life of immortality. And a Lich is a wonderful opportunity to explore the dark side of immortality. There is this idea that if you could live forever, you would outlive everything that you cared about. All the things that you grew up with, all the people that you loved, all the places that you once knew have changed and crumbled away, and the Lich has been unable to form any new connections. There's nothing that they love anymore, except for themselves.
A Lich might make a great fallen hero, and this is an archetype that you can actually use to inspire a lot of the roleplay and flaws and bonds of your Lich. Perhaps they were a great wizard who foresaw an imminent threat, and so as they set out to stop this threat, they realized that they needed more power and more time, which drove them to the path of Lichdom. In the process of trying to prepare themselves to face this threat, they lost their minds. And so what you have is, again, a person with good intentions, a person who set out into the world to be a hero, but fell to their own madness along the way. This makes a much more interesting villain, and I think rather than just a master of an undead army who is seeking power, that's one way to present this, and really there's nothing wrong with buying into that trope. But some of our favorite villains are the ones that we can understand their path to becoming this. And so thinking a little bit more about your Lich's journey to Lichdom and what set them on that course.
The core notion that a Lich has pursued this, they have chosen this, they have made their bed, and now they must sleep in it. And I think that dark side of it is something that is so often forgotten about in the kind of the Skeletor style cackling mad with power villain that Liches are often portrayed as. Liches are often portrayed as being very, very competent, very, very skilled, very, very intelligent. Like, they don't have any flaws aside from, like, the standard, the villain is too powerful, and has the classic villainous hubris or pride sort of thing. But I really like exploring this kind of meatier idea of a Lich being someone that did this to themselves. And it really comes back to, ultimately, the essence of the Lich's curse is the same thing that powers all undead. Undead fall to evil because they must consume life to sustain their undeath. And in the case of the Lich, they must consume the soul itself, which is fundamentally like the most evil thing, right? Because you are destroying the essence of what someone could be. There's nothing wrong with having your Lich just be a thinly veiled Skeletor, but I think that we can do more nuanced and interesting things with such fantastic material to work with.
And with such fantastic material to work with, now we want to talk about actually battling the Lich. As a dungeon master, Liches are masterminds, and their stat block advertises something that I think leaves a little to be desired, in the sense that they have pretty low hit points. But when you are bringing your Lich to life on the table, in terms of battlefield tactics, you need to keep in mind their intelligence, their minions, and all of the things they have at their disposal to really threaten the players.
Now, of course, it goes without saying that as an undead mastermind creature that has a very long view perspective thanks to their immortality, Liches are great planners and schemers. And it's very unlikely your player characters are going to come toe-to-toe with a Lich without having to battle through a horrific stronghold or undead army of some kind. And a Lich will ultimately have tons of escape plans and other ways of getting out of the situation without being destroyed. But it is worth mentioning that a Lich who knows their phylactery is secure has a sense of invulnerability about them. And so a Lich that knows that if they're going to be destroyed, they will simply reform a short time later, might have a level of hubris and pride about them that prompts them to come to battle with the player characters when another villain would much rather flee. And this is because a Lich can use this trait of rejuvenation to win a battle of attrition against the player characters. A Lich knows that, yes, perhaps they don't have to survive this battle, but if they're able to kill or incapacitate or maim or destroy several of the player characters in the process, then that's kind of a victory for them.
We often talk about how intelligent creatures and characters, you should keep in mind their ability to escape and flee. But a Lich doesn't really care about fleeing if their phylactery is intact. Death is just temporary for them, and they're going to come back. So if you can use everything you've got to take out one player character and then die in the process, that seems valuable for a Lich, because unlike the Lich, that player character has a much harder time coming back. On the flip side of that, if the Lich knows that their phylactery has been destroyed or is in danger, they are much less likely to stick around at all for a combat encounter. If they are threatened or the player characters actually find them, they will do their best to escape.
Ultimately, however, one of the great things about a Lich is having that final showdown against the evil wizard to cap off an amazing campaign. Perhaps there is a situation where the Lich needs to be brought to battle and maybe their phylactery isn't threatened, but their greater goal or their greater objective is. So, for example, if the Lich is about to succeed on their ultimate ritual to bring about whatever Age of Darkness they want to, they're probably going to fight pretty hard in those situations, because this is the culmination of thousands of years of work. They might not be so willing to abandon their stronghold where they have assembled thousands of years of arcane lore so readily, or perhaps even the Lich has been deceived by the player characters and is not aware that the player characters have actually secured a way to destroy their phylactery without their notice, and is fighting with a confidence that they really shouldn't have.
With the Lich's battle tactics, they are all about their spell casting, so think more about just blasting the party, and think about how a Lich might use their spells to thwart, stop, or undo the party's plans. As well, one of the great things about a Lich is because we do consider them the master of undeath, you really have your pick of the litter for who their henchmen are. With a lot of the great monsters that have been added in with Volo's, Fizzbands, and Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, there are a lot of great monsters to choose who could be more than just the skeleton and zombie minions. Of course, we have great staples like wraiths and banshees and ghosts that could serve a Lich, but now there are so many more interesting options that you can really bring to life. Who is he sending out to thwart his enemies and undo their plans or protect his phylactery? You really have a great choice for some really amazing battles to bring to life before the player characters can even get to the Lich.
Now, ever since Vecna got betrayed by his vampire lieutenant Cass, Liches have not been too enthusiastic about having vampiric lieutenants, although Death Knights still seem to be mostly loyal. But if there is one iconic minion that every true Lich Lord needs to have, it's an undead dragon.
Yeah.
Yeah, nothing tells your player characters I am the master of death like a Lich riding an undead dragon. And we got some great things to use out of Fizban's Treasury of Dragons in this respect.
Prior to Fizban's, there was also the Draco Lich, which I thought was a great candidate for let's put a Lich on a giant undead dragon.
Or make the Lich into a giant and undead dragon.
Right. But now with Fizban's, we have seen some great additions. And we're going to get into now, this is the variations that we might add to a Lich to make them more potent as a final villain for your campaign. And I think adding in a Ghost Dragon is such a cool idea. I love the Ghost Dragon. What's really great here is that the Ghost Dragon is not technically a legendary creature. It doesn't have legendary actions, although it does have legendary resistance.
It does, and it's resistant to a ton of damage, including just having flat-out resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, and 300 hit points, so it can soak up a ton of damage.
Yeah, and the reason why it's important that it doesn't have legendary actions, though, is because your Lich does. And so when you go into that final battle, you really want the Lich to be the main villain.
Yeah.
So putting them on a Ghost Dragon makes the dragon a threat, but makes the Lich the star of the show.
I love the idea of a Lich riding a Ghost Dragon, but Fizban's also gives us a really lovely kind of cherry on top in the form of the Dragon Bone Golem.
Yes.
So I love this idea of a Lich that has bound a dragon body and soul to serve as its favored minion. And it really gives you that extra action economy because the terrifying breath of the Ghost Dragon and the petrifying breath of the Dragon Bone Golem are like a beautiful wine and cheese pairing combined with all the other abilities of the Lich themselves. The Ghost Dragon is great because it has hover and it can't be knocked prone, so the Lich can stay and fly on this thing. It's immune to like so many status conditions too, so the Lich can very safely fly on the back of their Ghost Dragon while the Dragon Bone Golem ravages the party on the ground. And of course I want to grab the Zombie Clot from Van Richten's to be kind of like the rank and file to really capture this idea of a mountain of undead minions coming towards the party.
I might kind of use a homebrew rule here where because the Lich is riding the Ghost Dragon, you can kind of use that look out sir minion rule where you can't target the Lich while it's on the dragon until the dragon has been defeated.
My house rule that I propose here is actually stealing the rule from the Shield Guardian. Which is the bound Shield Guardian amulet, but just applying that to another creature. So basically the idea with this rule is that while the Lich is within 60 feet of the Ghost Dragon or the Dragon Bone Golem, the damage that the Lich takes is transferred to those creatures instead. With the Shield Guardian, it's normally just half the damage, but what I would probably do in this case is that any damage the Lich takes is first split between the Dragon Bone Golem and the Ghost Dragon until they're both destroyed. And only once those two are destroyed will the Lich take any actual damage.
So that makes it a much more robust combat, and it actually takes care of my main issue with the Lich is that they only have 100 or so hit points.
Yeah, they can just get punked. A Lich on their own is actually a decent challenge for like a level 10 to 13 party. Despite having a challenge rating of 21, a level 20 party is just gonna like knock over a Lich like they're nothing.
Yeah, and I think the scariest thing is if you have a paladin in your party that manages to get up to the Lich and use their highest level spell slot on a smite. That Lich is going to go down real fast.
And that's why I think it's also worth changing the Lich's spell list quite heavily. The default Lich has Power Word Kill, which is a scary spell to give a Lich, but also just not a lot of fun because it either kills a player and takes them out of the fight right then and there, or does nothing. So I recommend changing the Lich's spell list, particularly their high level spells. Here's a list of spells that we think just Take out your least favorite spell on the Lich's list and add each of these spells in to season to taste.
So starting at the top with cantrips, giving them Chill Touch, Mage Hand, and Toll the Dead seems really thematic. We're also going to give them the first level spell Silvery Barbs, if you're allowing it in your game.
No, I think even if you're not allowing your players to take this spell, you should give your Lich Silvery Barbs.
Yeah, it makes them much scarier. Same with the second level spell Vortex Warp, which was also introduced in Strixhaven. We'll get into how to use that properly in a moment. We're also going to give them Counterspell and Thunderstep. We're going to give them Evard's Black Tentacles and Dimension Door, Bigby's Hand, Eye Bite, Force Cage, Feeble Mind, and finally, Prismatic Wall.
While we're on the subject of spell list, another honorable mention to add to the Lich's arsenal in the midst of all this are a couple of Deathlock Wights or Deathlock Masterminds with Counterspell. Just adding a couple other spellcasting undead minions with Counterspell to protect the Lich's spellcasting from the counterspells of your party can also be a nice way to smooth out the Lich's power.
So when we talk about tactics with this spellcasting, the reason why we've given them some of these great spells is because of the power potential and the great plays that can be done at the table. First of all, with Force Cage in your back pocket, you can trap a group of players in the Force Cage.
Specifically the Paladin.
Yes. If you trap your Paladin in a Force Cage, you also have another great spell that you can use, which is Vortex Warp, which we've talked about this tactic before, but if the character trapped in the Force Cage leaves the Force Cage, you can use Vortex Warp to just throw them right back in.
Yeah, exactly. So if you do happen to have a Vengeance Paladin that's going to be teleporting out of the Force Cage, and they probably will because they have a good Charisma saving throw, you can just stuff them right back in there with Vortex Warp, and your Paladin's going to run out of spells before your Lich does.
Now, we also have a lovely combo here by giving them Prismatic Wall and Bigby's Hand. These spells go together much better than you might suspect. Prismatic Wall you get to place, and okay, well, the player characters can just avoid it. Well, unless you're flicking them into it with Bigby's Hand.
And I also like to imagine a Lich's Bigby's Hand being like a giant skeletal hand that grabs the players and throws them into the Prismatic Wall. Prismatic Wall and Force Cage don't require concentration from your Lich either, so these are spells that are going to be put down on the battlefield and are going to stay there, despite the fact that the Lich is probably going to have to make a lot of concentration checks to keep their spells going. So that's why having a lower level spell that they concentrate on can be a little bit better, because oftentimes with something like Bigby's Hand, well, if the Lich does lose their concentration on their turn, they can just cast it again and continue picking up the players and whipping them into their Prismatic Wall.
Meanwhile, the party healer, you should probably drop Feeble Mind on them, rendering them pretty much useless until they figure out how to deal with that.
Because the Lich is a brilliant mastermind, as a dungeon master, you have the license to metagame with your Lich. Assume that the Lich has been watching the party, knows all of their abilities, knows what their best saving throws are, knows everything about their defenses, and knows everything about their tactics. The Lich does not go blind into a fight with the party. They know everything they are capable of, and specifically, your Lich should have developed specific countermeasures to defeat whatever your party's number one tactic is. So if you do have a group of player characters who work together really well as a team, and perhaps they have their own 1-2 punch or combo that they're using over and over again, give the Lich some way of basically dismantling that effortlessly and forcing the party to rethink their plans.
An obvious spell that we should mention here, with all of these tactics in play, one thing that might get in the way of the Lich's victory is successful saving throws. But don't worry, that's why we gave him Silvery Barbs. So that's in your back pocket so that when you are trying to flick creatures into your Prismatic Wall or Vortex Warp them back into your Force Cage, you can use Silvery Barbs as an insurance policy to make sure the Lich is succeeding at their tactics.
This is a very brutal tactic. So again, this is something to whip out if you really need to challenge a party that has got a little bit too overconfident in their ability to deal with the Lich. One other thing that you can do with a Lich that is really nasty is by giving them Chill Touch. Something that people forget that Chill Touch has as an attribute is that a creature that has been damaged by it cannot regain hit points. And a Lich can use a legendary action to cast a cantrip. So one of the greatest things that you can do with a Lich in their legendary action is simply spam Chill Touch against a single player character. This, over the course of the Lich's 3 legendary actions, their Chill Touch will do 12d8 points of damage to them and prevent them from being healed. And so my favorite tactic to do with this is if I have a player character that's low on hit points or perhaps even dying on the ground, the Lich can just hit them with a Chill Touch and prevent them from joining the fight again.
And while all this is going on, if your characters do decide to bust out Healing Word, Revivify, Cure Wounds, or any of those other great healing spells, that's the perfect time to use Counterspell. Now again, with these tactics, keep in mind that we are advertising difficult play for Tier 4 of Dungeons & Dragons. Use these as you see fit to challenge your party appropriately. With the tactics we've given you, it is possible that if you are going up against an inexperienced lower level party, that this could be pretty devastating. What we're hoping this says is that there are tactics here and ways to kind of recreate the Lich as an appropriate challenge rating 21 monster that the party has to face at the end of an epic campaign. And just by doing a few extra spells, a few ideas on their tactics, and some really cool minions on the battlefield, you can turn this into an extremely memorable battle that your player characters are going to have to think outside the box to deal with.
Furthermore, if you really want to spice things up a little bit more, consider giving your Lich some powerful legendary magic items like Robes of the Archmage, a Staff of the Magi, a Carpet of Flying, or any other of those things that wizards wish they could have. Giving a magic item like this to the Lich can also improve their defenses just a little bit, can give them more access to a wider range of spells to use in combat, and in particular case of the Staff of the Magi, can give them a wonderful final goodbye.
So now you have your final boss ready, but let's talk about inspiring adventures based on a Lich. We have a few core ideas here. First of all, let's talk about the most obvious trope. And that is that your Lich is the lord of an undead army who is seeking power and wants to bring undeath to the world. This is a classic trope, and sometimes there's nothing wrong with digging into the classic trope. This is where you could have your Skeletor Lich, who just raises an army of all the coolest undead minions and is marching from the north towards the cities while they bicker. Sounds a little bit like Game of Thrones, but it works.
It works super well.
And it can be like almost like a spreading plague of undeath.
Yeah. And the player characters, learning that the Lich has a phylactery, simply must go on a great quest to find the Lich's phylactery and destroy it. And of course, the phylactery is very much inspired by even the older trope in the book of The Lord of the Rings, in that phylacteries are artifacts that can only be destroyed in specific ways. So not only do the player characters have to get the phylactery, they have to whip it into the volcano of Mount Doom to destroy it, or whatever specific destruction method that you've decided on for this phylactery.
If we want to draw inspiration from other literature and concepts, there is also Voldemort and his Horcruxes, which he had multiple of. And there's no reason why we can't take the Lich's phylactery and divide it into multiple pieces. And of course, it makes sense that the Lich would then hide these pieces in the most dangerous places it could find, give it to its greatest lieutenants. Maybe it made a deal with a great ancient red dragon in a volcano to have it as part of its treasure hoard. And so you divvy these pieces up, put them in great locations, great adventure sites with great monsters protecting it. You now have a great campaign where the characters need to uncover the locations of the multiple pieces of the phylactery, find the means to destroy them, and destroy all of them before finally confronting the Lich itself.
Now, there's actually another place where we can actually combine Sauron and Voldemort a little bit and explore the idea that maybe the Lich breaks their phylactery into pieces and gives the phylactery as a gift. Maybe the Lich's phylactery is actually the crowns of several realms, or that are worn by the monarchs, or rings that are worn by a council of powerful archmages. And so maybe the Lich's phylactery is hiding in plain sight as a treasure of a human society, and they don't even realize this. And the Lich is actually able to use that artifact to manipulate those kingdoms.
This could also be where you add a curse element to owning the phylactery, where maybe it curses the people who have held them for a long time with undeath.
Yeah.
So upon the death of the king, suddenly the king rises again as a skeleton king, and now they are completely warped by their undeath and have turned into a horrible villain. That, in my opinion, is a great classic Lich tale.
You got an entire campaign. And of course, we can also do the inversion of that, which also follows along with the Voldemort sort of example, where the Lich's phylactery has been shattered, and the Lich has minions that want to rebuild the phylactery to summon the Lich back again. So its phylactery was not properly destroyed by the last group of adventurers, and now the Lich's minions can reassemble it to bring that Lich back. Gives you great arcs if you kind of want to play it straight with the Lich. You want to embrace those things. But what if we wanted to do something a little bit different?
Well, let's go back to some of our role-playing ideas for the Lich and expand on those. One that I absolutely love is the Lich with noble intentions. Perhaps the curse of undead was starting to spread without the help of the Lich. The Lich was a great necromancer who saw this coming and decided that they needed more power and more time to deal with it. And I actually think what you have here is, instead of posing the Lich as the main antagonist, they are a chess piece in the puzzle of your campaign. Along the way of trying to deal with the curse of undeath, the player characters discover this cult of necromancers and the Lich, and either have to decide if they can rehabilitate the Lich and get the Lich to step out of its madness and actually help the party deal with the undeath, or if it's better to just destroy them.
I love this idea that the Lich has foreseen a future threat that is decades, perhaps centuries in the future, and they're using their long view to change history now. It's almost kind of like an inverse of the Terminator. The Lich in the present day has seen their future, where a band of adventurers will eventually rise and destroy them. So the Lich has decided to destroy the bloodline of those who will eventually cause those who will defeat them to emerge. Counterpoint to this, maybe the Lich has seen a future threat and is trying to prepare the world to meet that future threat. And so the Lich has started a mage school or a guild of adventurers and is training all of the future generations and is trying to raise up not an army of undead, but an army of great and powerful heroes. But in the meantime, all the wizards that are part of, or heroes that are part of this guild, are given an amulet or a ring upon their graduation. This ring is tied to the Lich's phylactery, and so when these heroes do die, the Lich absorbs their souls.
So with all of this in mind, we hope that this gives you enough inspiration to look at more than just the stat block of a Lich. Think about who your Lich is. What sort of adventures might encompass a Lich being involved, and what their tactics might be if they end up being the prominent villain of your campaign. There are lots of great ways to bring this extremely famous and well-known monster to life in really meaningful ways in your games of Dungeons & Dragons. Hopefully this inspires you to take it a bit further in your games. So this has been a look at running Liches in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Tell us about some of the great stories you've had running a Lich in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. We regularly meet with our patrons in our Discord server for our monthly writer's room, where our patrons help us develop scripts for new episodes or give us topic suggestions and ideas. And we want to thank all the patrons that asked us to revisit the idea of looking at monsters in D&D 5e. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube, you can become a patron of our show by following the links in the description below.
And don't forget to check out our live play in the Worlds of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we've got plenty more great advice for Dungeon Masters running games of D&D 5e right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time
in the dungeon.